My name is Claire Harmon. I am 32 years old, and for as long as I can remember, Thanksgiving in our house was never really about gratitude. It was a performance. A stage my parents built, lit, and handed over to my sister every single year while I sat in the audience and pretended I didn't mind. That last November, I sat at the dining table with my hands folded in my lap, watching my father lift his glass and say the words that finally broke something loose inside me. I had been holding it together for years. I thought I could hold it together for one more holiday. I was wrong. Within an hour, everything my sister had built came down around her, and the phone calls that followed lasted for days. If you had been sitting in my chair that night, I wonder if you would have done what I did. Stay with me, because this story begins much earlier than that dinner table, and it ends somewhere neither of us expected. Boston in November has a particular kind of cold that settles into your coat before you even reach the door. The kind that reminds you that warmth is something you have to earn. I grew up in a row house in Brookline, the older of 2 daughters, and I learned early that being first did not mean being first in my parents' eyes. That lesson arrived quietly, the way most painful things do, on a Thanksgiving morning when I was 9 years old. My mother had spent the week before the holiday baking, and the house smelled of cinnamon and roasted sweet potatoes. My grandmother had driven up from Providence, and the living room was loud with relatives I saw twice a year. My father called us both into the kitchen before dinner to give us what he called early presents, a tradition he had started when I was too small to question it. He handed me a card. Inside was a $20 bill and a note that read, "In my mother's careful handwriting, for books you love." My sister, who was 6, received a child's art easel with a full set of paints, brushes, and 3 canvases already primed and ready. The room filled with oohs and the kind of laughter that comes from watching a small child light up. I held my card and smiled and said thank you. My mother was already crouching down to help my sister open the paint tubes. No one noticed me slip the card into my pocket. That night, after the dishes were done and my grandmother had fallen asleep in the armchair, I sat on the bottom step of the stairs and listened to my sister press her hands into the paint and make bright red prints across a canvas while my parents laughed and told her she had a gift. I pressed my back against the banister and told myself it did not matter. I would find a way to make something of my own. I did. It took years, but I did. The path I took was not dramatic. There were no montage moments, no single day where everything clicked into place. It was early mornings and late nights. Libraries that smelled of old carpet. Summers spent shadowing a physician at the free clinic 2 blocks from our house because I had read somewhere that showing up was half the battle. I graduated high school with a scholarship, finished college in 3.5 years, and got into medical school on my first application. My parents came to my white coat ceremony. My mother took one photo, posted it once, and by dinner was telling my grandmother about my sister's new apartment in the South End, which she had decorated herself, and which apparently looked like something out of a magazine. My sister's name is Sienna. She is 28, 4 years younger than me, and she is, by most measures that her followers understand, wildly successful. She began posting about beauty and wellness when she was 22, casual videos of her morning routine, her smoothie recipes, her apartment in the soft South End light. Within 2 years, she had a following that most people spend a decade chasing. She collaborated with skincare brands and supplement companies, flew to Los Angeles for shoots, and appeared in a regional lifestyle magazine that my mother framed and hung in the hallway. My parents could not stop talking about her. Every phone call home somehow circled back to Sienna's latest campaign, Sienna's latest number, Sienna's latest opportunity. I was finishing my residency at Massachusetts General during those years. 36-hour shifts. Patients I thought about long after I went home. A case involving a 12-year-old girl with an undiagnosed autoimmune condition that I spent 3 nights researching before I found the answer that 2 other doctors had missed. When I told my mother about it, she said, "That was wonderful, truly wonderful." And then she said that Sienna had just hit 500,000 followers and wasn't that something. I stopped calling as often after that. Not because I was angry, or not only because I was angry, but because I was tired in a way that had nothing to do with the hospital. I had begun to understand that the exhaustion I felt after every conversation with my family was not about the conversation at all. It was the recognition that I had been doing it wrong for years, bringing my real life to a table where only one kind of success was ever welcome, and that table was not set for me. Still, I kept going home for the holidays. That is the part that is hardest to explain to people who have not lived it. You know the room will be cold in the way that matters. You know the toast will not include your name. And you go anyway, because there is a part of you, maybe the 9-year-old sitting on the bottom stair, that still believes one day they will finally see you. The first sign that something was wrong came in the spring of the year before that last Thanksgiving. I had been volunteering at a community health center in Dorchester for nearly 5 years at that point. I had started going on Saturday mornings during my second year of residency, mostly because I needed to remember why I became a doctor, and the work there did that for me in a way that the hospital, with all its machinery and hierarchy, sometimes couldn't. The center served families who could not afford what the hospital offered. I did intake assessments, helped with screenings, connected patients with resources. I did it quietly, the way I did most things, without announcement, without posting about it, without asking anyone to applaud. That spring, the center announced it was expanding. A new wing, funded by a combination of grants and private donations, would add space for a dental clinic and a mental health program. The director, a woman named Dr. Okafor, who had run the center for 15 years, called me into her office one afternoon and told me with genuine warmth that my anonymous contributions over the years had been part of what made the expansion possible. She asked if I would allow her to acknowledge my support at the dedication ceremony. I said yes. It felt, quietly, like something. 3 weeks later, I found out that the room at the center's entrance, the welcoming room with the mural and the children's corner and the small library of health resources, had been named after my sister. I sat with that information for a long time before I understood what I was looking at. Sienna had announced on her platform that she was donating to the center. A video, a caption about community care and giving back, a link to her page where she had tagged the center and mentioned a 5-figure donation. Her followers praised her. The center thanked her publicly. My parents called me, both of them, together on speaker, which they never did, to tell me how proud they were that Sienna had chosen to support a cause so close to all of them. They did not mention that the center was where I had spent every Saturday for 5 years. I would find out later, through a chain of events that I could not have anticipated, that the donation my sister had made was not her money at all. But I did not know that yet. What I knew, standing in my apartment kitchen with my phone in my hand and my parents' voices filling the air, was that the room that should have held my name held hers instead, and my family was celebrating on the other end of the line while I stood there in the dark. I told them I was happy for her. I set the phone on the counter. I stood very still for a while. Then I made dinner and did not eat it and went to bed and lay there staring at the ceiling, thinking about the 9-year-old on the bottom stair. The call that changed everything came in late September. My closest friend, a woman named Priya, who I had known since the first year of medical school and who now worked in healthcare administration, had been helping me apply for a grant to fund a diabetes prevention program through the community center. We had been working on the application for months. It was a significant grant, $80,000, and the program, if funded, would reach hundreds of patients in Dorchester who had no other access to that kind of preventive care. I had written most of the proposal myself, at night, after shifts, at coffee shops on weekends, with a focus and care I brought to very few things outside of medicine. 2 days before the submission deadline, the grant organization contacted Priya to say they had received a tip about one of the lead applicants. The tip claimed that I had misrepresented my credentials and that my work at the community center was largely ceremonial. The grant was placed on hold pending review. I remember the way Priya's voice sounded when she told me, "Careful." The way a person sounds when they are about to say something that will hurt you, and they already know it. I called the organization directly. They were polite and distant. They said they could not share the source of the tip. They said the review process would take time. I hung up and sat in my car in the parking garage and tried to understand how a version of me that did not exist had managed to reach the ears of a grants committee in ways that mattered. It was Priya who first suggested that the pattern was not accidental. She came over that weekend with her laptop and a kind of quiet fury that I recognized from the years she had spent fighting for resources in a system that did not always want to give them. She sat at my kitchen table and started asking me to think about the last 6 months. The grant tip. A comment I had heard secondhand from a colleague that someone was saying my patient reviews contained complaints I had never been shown. A hospital administrator who had been warm toward me for 2 years and was suddenly cool and distant in a way that had no explanation. Priya laid them out like a case and asked me if I saw what she saw. I saw it. I did not want to see it, but I saw it. I had noticed, over the years, that Sienna had a way of asking me about my work that felt more like reconnaissance than interest. How many patients was I seeing at the center? Whether I had applied for any grants recently? Whether there was anyone at the hospital who might be a good contact for her wellness content? She asked in that light, casual way that could always be dismissed as idle curiosity. I had dismissed it. I had told myself I was being paranoid, that no one would do that she was my sister. What Priya found, 3 weeks into her quiet investigation, was a trail. It started with an email. A colleague of Priya's in the grants world had heard the name of the person who filed the tip through a source that Priya trusted. The name was not Sienna's name, but the email address associated with it had been created 2 days after I told my mother I was applying for the grant, during a phone call in which my sister had been in the room. The email was registered to an address that mapped to a building in the South End, Sienna's building. We found a review forum for medical professionals where 3 entries in the past year had described a doctor at Massachusetts General using my specialty, my general department, and details that could only have come from someone with access to my conversations. The account that had posted them had no other activity. We found that the donation my sister had made to the community center, the one that put her name on the wall, had been funded through a family savings account my parents had opened decades ago, one that my sister and I were both technically listed on as adult dependents following a restructuring my parents had done for estate planning purposes. An account I had nearly forgotten I existed. Sienna had made the donation in her name using $12,000 she withdrew from that account. She had not told our parents where the money came from. She had taken credit for a generosity that was not hers, and had used our family's money to buy herself a wall in a place I had built with 5 years of my Saturdays. I sat with that for a long time too, longer than I should have. The thing that finally moved me from grief into clarity happened on a Sunday afternoon in October. I had gone to my parents' house to drop off some things my mother had asked me to pick up, and I let myself in through the back door, which I had done since I was a teenager. My mother and my sister were in the kitchen. They did not hear me come in. I set the bags on the counter near the door and was about to announce myself when I heard Sienna say, in a low and certain voice, that she had taken care of the grant situation and that by the time everything settled, the clinic would still be associated with her name and not mine. My mother's response was not shock. It was a short, quiet sound that carried a kind of satisfaction I recognized. The same sound she had made watching Sienna press her painted hands onto the canvas 32 years ago. I backed out through the door without making a sound. I drove home with both hands tight on the wheel, and I did not cry, which surprised me. What I felt was not sadness. It was the opposite of sadness. It was something sharp and very clear, like a diagnosis finally named after years of unexplained symptoms. I called Priya that night and told her what I had heard. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said we had everything we needed. Over the next 3 weeks, Priya helped me build a file. We documented the withdrawal from the family account, with bank statements Priya requested through legal channels. We saved the email trail associated with the grants tip, preserved in metadata that pointed to Sienna's building. We saved the review posts with their timestamps cross-referenced against conversations I had with my family. We had the audio of what I had heard in my mother's kitchen, recorded on my phone, which I had presence of mind to activate before I left. Priya knew people in digital forensics from her administrative work, and one of them confirmed that the grants tip email had been sent from a device registered to my sister's name. We also found that Sienna had done something similar to a former business partner 2 years earlier, a woman who had been building a wellness content collaboration with her and had inexplicably lost 3 brand deals within a month of announcing the partnership. That woman had no idea why. Now she might. Priya sat across from me at my kitchen table the night we finished the file and said, quietly, that what we had was enough to take to a lawyer. She said it gently, because she knew that I had not fully let go of the version of this story where my family was simply blind, simply thoughtless, simply unable to see past the brightness of one daughter. She knew that accepting this evidence meant accepting something harder, that it had never been blindness at all. I looked at the file on the table between us. I thought about the 9-year-old with the $20 card. I thought about the 5 years of Saturdays. I thought about the room with my sister's name on the wall, and the grant that had been paused, and the patients in Dorchester who were still waiting for a diabetes program that might not come because someone had needed to dim another light. I told Priya I was ready. Thanksgiving that year was at my parents' house. Extended family, neighbors, a few people from my mother's church. My aunt and uncle drove up from Connecticut. My father's brother, who I liked, was there with his wife. The house smelled the way it always did that time of year. Roasted things and candles and the particular warmth of too many people in not enough rooms. I arrived early and helped my mother set the table and folded napkins into shapes I had learned from a patient who had been a restaurant manager. And my mother admired them in the absent way she admired most things I did, and asked whether I had seen Sienna's latest post about gratitude practices. I said I had. I set the last napkin in its place and told myself the time would come soon enough. The table seated 20. My sister arrived 40 minutes later in a coat that photographed well, and I watched 2 cousins take out their phones almost immediately. She moved through the room with the ease of someone accustomed to being watched, touching shoulders, laughing at the right moments, filling the space the way she always had. She hugged me warmly and told me I looked tired, which she always said, and I told her she looked well, which was always true. My father stood before the meal to give what had become, over the years, less of a grace and more of a tribute. He was not a cruel man. I have always believed that. But he was a man who had made a choice, decades ago, about which of his daughters was the story, and he had never reconsidered it. He raised his glass and spoke about gratitude and family, and the way a parent's heart swells watching a child become something the world takes notice of. He said my sister's name. He mentioned the community center, the room, the way it showed who she was at her core. He said they were so proud to call her their daughter. He did not say my name. He had not said my name in one of these toasts in 11 years. I had counted. The room lifted their glasses. My sister smiled in the particular way she smiled when she was receiving praise she had already anticipated. I watched her eyes move around the table, collecting it, and I watched them land on me for just a moment. That same flicker I had been seeing my whole life. The quick, bright flash of something that was not warmth. I put my phone on the table. I had spent 2 weeks setting up what came next. The file was organized, compressed, and linked. The accompanying message was clear and factual, with no editorializing. I had sent it to myself from a secondary account, ready to share, and I had added to the recipient list every adult at that table whose email address I had, along with Dr. Okafor at the community center, the grants committee contact, and the former business partner Priya had found. I had done it this way deliberately, not out of cruelty, but because I had already tried the private route. I had already brought evidence to my parents and watched my mother use the word jealous like a door slamming shut. I had already understood that the truth, in this family, was only welcome when it was convenient. My father was still speaking. I pressed send. The first phone began buzzing within seconds, then a second. Then the whole table came alive with a low electronic sound, an odd kind of chorus. My father lost his sentence. My mother looked down at the device beside her plate. My uncle, who was sitting across from me, read something and looked up slowly with an expression I had not seen on his face before. My sister's posture changed before she had even looked at her phone. Some part of her knew. She picked it up. She scrolled. The color left her face in stages, beginning at the forehead and moving downward. And by the time she looked up at me, she looked like someone who had been standing in a room and suddenly noticed the walls were missing. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. I said, clearly enough for the table to hear, that the community center donation had been made using money from our family's shared account, $12,000, that Sienna had withdrawn without asking anyone's permission. I said the name on that room had been purchased with funds that were not hers. I said the grant that my patients in Dorchester were still waiting for had been delayed because a tip was filed from an email account traced to her address. I put my phone face up on the table so my father could see the bank statement on the screen if he wanted to look. My sister said my name once, sharply, like a warning. I said I had more. The audio was the part that changed the room completely. Priya had helped me clip the relevant 30 seconds cleanly. When my sister's voice came through the small speaker, low and certain, saying she had taken care of the grant situation, and that the clinic would stay associated with her name and not mine, and when my mother's quiet, satisfied sound followed, the table went very still. My aunt, who had been holding a dinner roll, set it down. My sister stood. She said the recording was taken out of context. She said I had been jealous of her entire life and that everyone in the room knew it. She looked to my mother, who was on her feet. Her face arranged in the expression I recognized from childhood, the one that preceded the word jealous, the one that meant the conversation was about to end on her terms. My father did not stand. He sat with his hands flat on the table and looked at the bank statement on my phone screen and did not say anything for a very long time. My mother told me I had chosen to ruin a family holiday over bitterness, and she hoped I was satisfied. My sister's voice was climbing, growing less careful, and I could see the moment she stopped performing and started panicking. The way the language changed, the way she began speaking faster, looking for an angle that would hold. My uncle, my father's brother, the one I liked, said quietly that the bank statement looked real to him and asked if anyone was going to address that. No one rushed to answer. My grandfather, who was 81 and had driven up from Providence and who had spent the dinner hour saying very little as he usually did, looked at me from across the table with an expression that I would later understand as something between recognition and relief. He said, in his careful way, that he had seen the way things were in this family for a long time and that he was glad someone had finally said it out loud. The room did not erupt, it thinned. My aunt and uncle from Connecticut said their goodbyes within the hour, quietly, without drama. Two of my mother's friends from the church said they needed to get home and thanked my parents in the way people thank hosts when they want to leave without incident. My sister made 2 phone calls in the hallway, both of which ended badly enough that I could tell from the change in her voice, the sudden, careful negotiating, the please, the I can explain. By the time the house had emptied down to family, my mother was sitting at the kitchen table not speaking, and my sister was upstairs, and my father was in the living room with the lights low. I stood in the hallway and looked at the framed magazine cover on the wall, my sister's face in that particular warm light, and I thought about all the years I had walked past it and told myself it was fine, it was just a photo. It did not mean what it felt like. My father came to the hallway. He did not say a great deal. He is not a man who apologizes directly, but he stood near me and said that he had not paid enough attention to the right things and that he was sorry for it. He said it without looking at the photo. It was not everything I had needed from him over the years. It was also not nothing. I drove home in the dark with the radio off. Boston at that hour was quiet in the particular way of holidays. Streets emptied of ordinary traffic, windows lit from inside. I thought about Dr. Okafor, who had received the file and who would read it in the morning, and who would have to make decisions about the room with my sister's name. I thought about the grants committee, who would have the evidence that the tip had been manufactured. I thought about the patients in Dorchester who were still waiting. The phone calls began that night and lasted, as I said, for days. The grants committee reopened the application within 2 weeks. Dr. Okafor called me on a Tuesday evening and said that after reviewing everything, the center would be making a change to the room's designation, and that if I was willing, my name would be the one on the wall. I said I would think about it. I thought about it for a day and then I said yes, not because I needed my name on a wall, but because the truth of what had happened deserved to be a matter of record. My sister hired a lawyer when the bank filed a fraud report over the unauthorized withdrawal. The process was not quick or simple, as these things never are, but it was real, and it had consequences she could not manage her way out of with a caption and a filter. The brands that had been her income pulled away. A few did it quietly, a few did it publicly, and the ones who did it publicly triggered the ones who had been on the fence, and the number that had defined her career for 6 years dropped in a way that did not recover. She did not come to my door. I think she understood that there was nothing at my door for her. My mother called me twice in the weeks after. The first call was angry. The second was something harder to name, a kind of uncertain quiet that I had not heard from her before. She did not apologize in any clear way. What she said, near the end of the second call, was that she had not realized how much she had missed. I told her I believed her. I also told her that believing her did not mean going back to the way things had been, and that I needed her to understand the difference. She was quiet for a long time and then she said she understood. I do not know yet whether that is true. I am willing to find out. The diabetes prevention program launched in February. Priya helped me coordinate the rollout. We had 12 patients enrolled in the first week, 40 by the end of the month. Dr. Okafor sent me a photo of the program materials laid out on the table in the room with my name on the wall, and I saved it to a folder I keep for things I want to remember. My grandfather called me on a Sunday in March. He said he had watched me carry things alone for too long and that he was proud of how I had handled all of it. He said he wished he had said something sooner. I told him that he had always said the thing that mattered most, which was that he saw me, and that it had been enough to keep me going when not much else was. He said he was glad, and we stayed on the phone for a while without talking very much, which is sometimes the best kind of conversation. I do not think about the Thanksgiving table very often now. What I think about more is the Saturday morning clinic, the room with my name on the wall, the patients who come in and sit in the children's corner where there are books in 3 languages because I asked for them to be there. I think about the work, which is what I always came back to when everything else was noise. I stayed quiet for a long time in that family. I told myself that patience was a kind of strength, that my turn would come, that the truth has a way of surfacing if you wait long enough. What I know now is that the truth does surface, but not on its own. You have to be the one to bring it up. You have to be willing to carry it to the table and set it down where everyone can see it, even when your hands are shaking, even when the room goes still and looks at you and waits. I was 32 years old at that table. I had been waiting for 23 years. I will not be waiting again. If you were sitting where I was that Thanksgiving, with everything you knew and everything you had built, I want to ask you something. What would you have done? Tell me in the comments. And if this story stayed with you, if something in it felt like something you have carried, I hope you know that you are not invisible. You never were. Stay with us for more stories of truth, justice, and the courage it takes to finally be seen.